Hi, I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge, and welcome to How to Help Your Hoarding Client Break Free. 4 tips to help your hoarding client get their life back. Tony wanted therapy for his chronic hoarding, and he also wanted me to see the problem for myself, so I visited him in his home. And I went to his house and rang the bell, and fortunately the door opened outwards, because if it had been an inward swinging door, it wouldn't have opened at all. There was no floor to his house, or if there was, it was impossible to see because of all the enveloping ocean of stuff. Tony hadn't been upstairs in 5 years because the staircase and upstairs were choked by the detritus of years. It seemed quite a large home, yet the stultifying stuff crammed in everywhere made it feel like the smallest of elevator cars. My TV is, I think, under there somewhere, he said, forlornly nodding towards a Mount Fuji of ancient magazines, and as though reading my mind, he said, "I call that my own Mount Fuji." It was hard to sound professional moving around his house like a constricted penguin. So I suggested we meet at my office a few days later, and this was going to be interesting. Hoarding may be a natural instinct. After all, the last ice age only ended 10,000 years ago. Hoarding food for the deep winters was vital for survival, but an instinctive need can sometimes turn into an all-consuming greed, which is not to judge it harshly, because by greed I mean compulsion, a kind of greed of the instincts. So how do we know when hoarding has become a problem? Well, first we can distinguish between collecting and hoarding. Many people collect, whether it's books, shoes, vinyl records, or vintage jugs. Collecting may feel compulsive, but we can distinguish it from hoarding. Hoarding tends to be indiscriminate. The hoarder may keep just about everything they've ever owned, even when it clearly no longer serves a purpose. Hoarding also tends to severely impact the daily life and well-being of the person doing it. Questions to ask about the collecting include, is it organized or chaotic? Tony's collecting was chaotic and random with no organization whatsoever. Collectors, on the other hand, rather than hoarders, may be quite neat and tidy. One guy I knew had arranged his hundreds of sci-fi books neatly in alphabetical order. Another question is it specific or indiscriminate? Collecting, as opposed to hoarding, tends to be specific, whereas Tony seemed to keep everything, even old tea bags. Does the person feel in control of it? Hoarders may feel unable to declutter, out of control and hopeless. Another question is it causing problems in the person's life? Hoarding may interfere with relationships and pose health risks, such as fire hazards. Sure, collecting might cause problems if you pay a bit too much for that rare stamp, for example, but the kinds of problems and risks associated with hoarding tend to be much more serious. So what do we need to consider when treating hoarding disorder? Tip 1. Work out what might be causing the hoarding. Some hoarders may do so for quite obvious reasons. Other times you may need to dig a little deeper to get to the bottom of the problem. Perhaps they have mobility issues and it's simply harder to dispose of stuff. Maybe they have dementia or some other cognitive issue, which makes organization difficult. Perhaps they have a psychotic illness, such as schizophrenia, or suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder. Hoarders may display maladaptive perfectionism and therefore have an intense fear of making the wrong decision or discarding something valuable. This can lead to a paralysis of decision-making, contributing to the accumulation of possessions. Now, we might ask our hoarding client if they've ever been diagnosed with any psychiatric condition, though generally they'll tell you before you ask. For many hoarders, emotional problems will be at the root of the issue, When did all this begin? A good way to work out what may be causing any problematic emotional and behavioral condition is by determining when it actually began. Then we can try to see what needs the client may be trying to meet through the behavior. Can you tell me when all this started? I asked Tony, and he looked sort of pensive. Then a shadow crossed his careworn face, and he told me a story of woe and adversity. After a childhood of being passed from one foster parent to another, he had married young, and Tony's young son had died 20 years ago, and soon after his wife had left him. He'd been battling depression and anxiety ever since. The pattern of much of Tony's life had been one of insecurity, loss, and trauma. In a life of loss, throwing things away can come to feel simply like more loss. The next question I asked got us closer to the crux of the problem, I think. So tip 2, what feelings come up? I asked Tony what feelings the thought of decluttering all that stuff brought up for him. He told me it made him feel panicky and exposed. If we reverse this, we can see that hoarding was helping him feel secure, protected, safe, and calmer. So it seemed that those were the needs he was trying to meet by hoarding. If we look at it this way, we can see that it's no wonder hoarders have a disinclination to throw stuff away. After all, it feels like that stuff is what's keeping them together, what's keeping them safe. Once we understand what needs a problematic pattern may be meeting, albeit in ways that damage the client, we can start to try to help them meet those needs in ways that are actually sustainable and healthy. Tony needed to feel safe and secure, calm and hopeful through healthy means, rather than through the maladaptive drive to hoard so much stuff he couldn't use his own house for proper living. We set to work. So tip 3, help your client deal with those feelings and rehearse decluttering. So Tony had a horrific memory of seeing his son run over and killed by a car. He still suffered flashbacks and nightmares to that time, and it was clear he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder from this 20-year-old tragedy. I used the rewind technique to help lift the traumatic effect from that time. The flashbacks stopped, as did the nightmares. This profound shift helped generate hope in Tony. I helped calm him naturally through therapeutic hypnosis, and also had him hypnotically rehearse decluttering his home and letting go of all that stuff whilst feeling calm about doing that. Once Tony was feeling better emotionally, he started to feel more confident and secure in himself generally. It became easier to start to think about detaching from the hoarding pattern. It was now time to get practical. So tip 4, release old wounds. I used the metaphor of releasing old wounds and burdens whenever I talked about throwing out trash Tony didn't need. This effectively reframed the whole process. Paradoxically, I suggested to Tony he start by adding more to his clutter, and this surprised him. The plan was for Tony to acquire and bring home a collection of large cardboard boxes. Each day he was to set aside one box for stuff he could let go of, and one for stuff he felt he should keep. He was to fill both boxes, and afterwards remove the trash box from the house. To, hopefully, make this easier for him, I ventured back into his house and helped him do this. And you might volunteer that too. Or see if you can organize for someone else close to the client to help them out. Sometimes we had discussions as to whether he really needed to keep what he'd put into the keep box, but it was always his decision. I merely told him what I thought might be throwawayable. Now, I continued to see Tony in my therapy room throughout this process. I hypnotized him to rehearse feeling calm and powerful when releasing old hurts, the rubbish he no longer needed. I also suggested he could notice profound and therapeutic feelings of letting go, which he did as he began to clear out all the trash. And I found that hoarders often lead diminished lives in which they do less. We can more generally help the hoarding client connect with others and fulfill their emotional needs in healthy ways. After 2 weeks, Tony could see the floor in every room of the house. And after 2 months, he had freed himself of 90% of the trash. Sometimes he got scared and felt he couldn't let something go. And I said, that's okay, Tony. If you really need it, keep it. But a wise part of you will know whether you really need to keep it. He got a part-time job, began to go out socially and meet new people, and even started to invite others into his home. From his new, calmer mindset, he found that he no longer needed to rely on materials to help him feel safe. He could meet his need for a sense of safety and security through the knowledge that he was becoming part of a wider social network. During this time, Tony was open with people about his former hoarding, and such are the coincidences the universe sometimes throws out, met a woman who also was a recovering hoarder. And together they helped one another live clear, clean, and more organized lives. Tony told me also that his mind felt tidier, clearer, and cleaner. He laughed as he told me that he guessed he'd finally conquered Mount Fuji. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe, and if you want to hear when my next video is published, hit the notification bell below. I'm Mark Terrell of Uncommon Knowledge, and if you'd like to subscribe to my email newsletter, you can find it over at unk.com/blog. And thanks for watching.